Three, two, one, action.
Well, let me tell you something, brother!
Having watched wrestling forever and known how many people are involved in it, how many creative people are involved in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a real head fuck to think that I did it.
No one else
Not
did
Vince.
it.
You know?
Yeah.
Not the billionaire. Not the billionaire with all the contacts.
The independent wrestler.
Me and us guys, yeah.
Those were the words of Ed Gamester to me last week, maybe seven or so hours before Mythos Ragnarok rocked the Cockpit in London for its 40th show. Mythos Ragnarok is the first ever use of professional wrestling within theatre in a big way where it's seeped through the entire show. And like Ed said to me, tongue in cheek, but truthfully, it wasn't a billionaire. It wasn't Vince McMahon, the man whose hands are all over professional wrestling, that did this. The guy that tried to create his own football league, the one who tried to make movies, bodybuilding company, tried to spread the WWE brand and, wrestling in many different ways. It wasn't him. It was Ed Gamester. It was a former writer, former stuntman, wrestler. Goodness, what else has Ed done? Strongman. It was this guy seemingly who out of nowhere who's done this and merged two forms of art that seemingly go hand in hand. I mean, those who will acknowledge and try to understand what professional wrestling is, in so many ways it correlates with theater. To me, this was a no-brainer and a thought in my head for so long. Like, it seems just to be a natural, right? Why doesn't this live form of performance, which is theater, merge with this live form of, again, a performance, which is professional wrestling? Because wrestling, like theater, there is no take two. There's a live audience. Yes, there's television cameras and sometimes things are cut and edited. However, the live audience see what they see. And if you go wrong, you go wrong, and nothing can be changed within reason. And that's obviously much like theater. If it goes wrong, it goes wrong. And you have to just keep rolling with the punches. And that was just, those obvious parallels to me were like, how has this not come together? How has this not become a thing? And if there's a flaw in theater, it's the fact that you cannot do certain things that you can do in film, where you can enhance realism with the power of special effects and tools behind closed doors, and then bring it to the surface, so to speak. Because in theater, it's right then and there, and of course, safety is paramount. So when it comes to things like action and battle sequences, there's obvious flaws, and there's obvious, we are leaving our minds behind when we watch a lot of theater shows and when they're fighting. In professional wrestling, it's a lot easier to believe because it's physical contact. And logically, I was always like, well, if you used that in theater, you'd curb out, you'd distance an obvious flaw, and you'd enhance the product, especially for theater shows, stories that require that form, like that, those fight sequences to tell the story. That is a show that Ed has created. Mythos Ragnarok. Mythos tells the story of Odin and Loki. I'm going to read the synopsis now. Join Odin and Loki in their struggle to overcome primeval giants, rival gods and goddesses, and each other's ambitions in this dark comic adaptation of Norse mythology. That is the tale of Mythos Ragnarok, the show that Ed's created, the one he wrote in in the pandemic. My apologies. In the pandemic, just to stay creative, just to do something and have a creative outlet for himself and fellow professional wrestlers, but also use it as a tool to showcase this is what wrestlers can do, and this is, you know, the beauty of professional wrestling and how it can tell stories. Because obviously, if we're talking about theater, there's a very obvious, it's a high class world. It's an elitist world. That theater has been that for many, many years. It's an elite form of entertainment, and it kind of will distance itself from lesser or working class forms of entertainment, and that's what wrestling has been perceived as. It's the redheaded stepchild, if you will, of theater and entertainment in general. So, and as Ed mentioned to me in our chat, that's very much how it's perceived in theater, and a lot of the rejection for Mythos has been due to just the word professional wrestling. However, one thing Ed did tell me, and he said in other interviews as well, Mythos Ragnarok is not a wrestling show. It's a show, it's a theater show, it's a story that has incorporated wrestling to further and enhance the show, which it does. And it does it expertly, and it's absolutely brilliant. And it was a thrill, it was a joy for me as a wrestling fan to see how this has just been wonderfully brought like theater and wrestling has been brought together, and how it highlights wrestling in such a wonderful way and shows this is what it can do for your art form, but this is what this art form is all about. It is just like theater, just like film, just like anything else. It's storytelling. And, you know, it was emotional in some ways, but thrilling as well. It was funny. It was intelligent. It was everything. It was just beautifully, beautiful storytelling. So for those of you who think on the surface, if you heard a Mythos that, oh, it's a wrestling show, it's a wrestling product that's put on a theater stage. No, get that out of your mind. Wrestling just happens to be involved, but this is very much a theater show. However, the only wrestling that's in it is the fact that our champions, kings, queens, instead of maybe crowns, they have wrestling belts, and those are passed over to one another when they lose in battle. Besides that, there is no wrestling. It is a story of betrayal, relationships, and larger-than-life mythology. That's the driving force, and it's for this reason that everything works. And it's for this reason that the wrestling also works, because it's not suddenly here's Loki, here's Odin, referee comes magically in the middle, ring the bell. No, it's just wrestling is just simply weaved in, because when these two or others characters battle, it's because of the story, it's the scenario that has brought these two together that they have to now fight, and the wrestling is only then used to create that fight scene. And because it's physical contact, because it's, like I said, it's not like the traditional theater fight scenes where it's blatantly choreographed, they're not hitting one another, they're poking one another with sticks. There's physical contact, it's intense, it's rugged, it's jarring, as Ed said to me. It takes it to another level, because when that momentum is built and we're ready, we're like, these two characters have stared off, and now boom, battle is about to ensue. That we're not taken out of the story because we see this obviously choreographed and fake fight. No, these guys are literally beating the crap out of each other and slamming each other and slapping each other and chopping each other, and the momentum keeps building, and it keeps going, and it keeps rolling, and you're hooked into the show. And a beautiful aspect of it, which Ed kind of alluded to, but then I saw firsthand when watching the show, was we have this wonderful blend. When we were at the cockpit, there was people who were kind of theater goers, people who were aware of wrestling but didn't know wrestling, Norse mythology fans, wrestling fans, or a combination of those. And when the first chop happened, or the first body slam happened, you saw this this incredible mix of reactions. There was a few ladies next to me who had this, like, not, they weren't frightened, but they were stunned by this. What the hell just happened? Why these people are literally being hurt? There was the cheers from those who are very much familiar with the wrestling. There was everything in between, and then slowly, as the show just goes on and on and on, and we're just sucked into the story, and the wrestling just blends effortlessly. All this audience that was at the cockpit just suddenly merged together, and we're like, oh, okay, we get what's going on, and we're just along for the ride. And that in itself was a beautiful thing to be a part of, and also experience, to see this mix of worlds come together, these mix of backgrounds come together, and how Mythos was able to bring us all in and allow us to appreciate every single aspect of this show. And it was one of the biggest thrills for me being there to see that.
What I think we've done really well in Mythos is not just like dump wrestling onto people and be like, but behold, moonsaults, Canadian destroyers. What we've learned is people who don't know wrestling don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
They don't know what a DDT is. They just think but both of you have just fallen over.
Yeah.
If you do a Canadian destroyer, they're just like, well, that was cool, but they have no idea what's happening. So we've learned...
Who's the one that got hurt?
Exactly. Who's the one that got hurt is the main problem we've had, because in wrestling you're like, oh, that was interesting. He went from this to that, and then obviously, when you look at it purely physically, you're like, none of this makes sense. Like, everyone is falling down, so the fact that one guy's slammed and one isn't is really nonsense. Anything off the top rope, obviously ridiculous. Landing on someone is going to hurt you, probably more than them. So none of it makes sense, and that really gets exposed to you as a wrestler when you're out in a theatre crowd, because you do something that would normally get a huge pop, and you're like, what? I wouldn't pop for that. It was a stunner. And then you think, what is a stunner? Oh, I kind of sit down on the floor, and the guy falls backwards, and everyone gets confused. And you're like, right, scrap that, and do... a chop. Yeah. Because you can't hide with a chop.
Or like a body slam's an obvious, I'm throwing this in.
Boom, exactly.
Another thing that I love about it is because if you know any great wrestler out there, for those of you who love professional wrestling, any top professional wrestling star would tell you the moves are just there to tell a story. Wrestling isn't about this move, this move, this move, this move, this move, this move. It's literally, the moves, the physicality is a tool to tell a story to the audience. That's when wrestling is at its best. And Mythos, and as I said to Ed, Mythos is a brilliant example of that, because wrestling is weaved in to further the story, and that it does. Every fight scene or wrestling scene enhances Mythos and takes it to the next step in a exciting and thrilling way. But it also it showcases character in so many ways. In the middle of a wrestling match, there's one of the characters called Freya, and we see her quirkiness come out, and like we have that stronger bond and understanding of her when she gets pulled Thor to the side, and she's like, "You're lucky, you're beautiful," and then she takes on and jumps into the fight scene and does some stuff. We have Loki, who on this occasion, for the first time ever, was played by Ed, who ordinarily plays Odin, but played Loki on this day and did an incredible job, by the way. He's, flirting with characters. He's running away during a wrestling scene. He's teasing betrayal towards Odin. So he's telling us about himself in these wrestling sequences. And again, so it's telling us about the characters. They are distinguishable, and like I said, the battles further the story in more ways than one. and also the moves that they use again are very telling to that character, because Loki doesn't do something that maybe Odin would do because he's a different style. He's sneaky. He's intelligent, shall we say, and he does moves and things that were more fitting of the character. So that's another brilliant element to it, and more and if we know about the characters, we become emotionally invested into them and then in the story, because much to my surprise, I was expecting to be entertained. I was hoping to be entertained, and I was hoping to really be immersed in it, but I didn't expect to be emotionally impacted by Mythos, and that is something I was, but that was because how the wrestling sequence as well as the overall story brings you in and sucks you into these characters. And like I said, they all of these characters possess a certain charm, and they kind of they become endearing, particularly a character like Loki. And therefore when it becomes real emotional and serious, we're hooked, and it's a beautiful feeling, and really impressive feat for Mythos, because like I said, and everyone in that audience at that night on the Cockpit last Sunday was hooked, which is a beautiful thing and a beautiful feeling, and what you want when you experience art like this. But another aspect of professional wrestling I will say is that it just again enhances theater, enhances this show in particular, was the unpredictability of it. Ordinarily, for me personally, I felt that when I watch a theater show, and even great ones, I'm really entertained. I'm immersed into the story. However, the element of unpredictability is not always looming in theater, because it's very structured. It's very rigid in terms of this is what's going to happen, and a very little changes. There is a direction, and that's followed. And ordinarily, there's no audience investment in theater, because people just sit and watch and maybe clap on the odd occasion. In this case, my apologies. In this case, with Mythos, because of the actual physical impact, the actual, the physical contact made with the wrestling, there was an element of unpredictability that at any moment these guys could just break into a fight. And when it's teased, it can happen at any moment. And it was a thrilling feeling. And it was like, oh, this is, I think, and eventually some of these characters are going to fight, but you're like, are they going to do it now? Is it going to happen later? Like, you don't know. And that was such a beautiful thing about this, because like I said, that's another thing that theater doesn't ordinarily have, but because of professional wrestling, it brought it to this show, and that is another thing that took this show to another level. And you're on edge, because there's a moment I remember in Act 2 where Odin and his gang are circling Loki and kind of his little crew, and the brilliant music that they've made for the show is playing, and they're just circling Loki's crew, and you're just like, what's going to happen? You're on edge. You're like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? And it's just tension builds, and it's epic. And then the climax, when they just, like I said, music's playing and every character is showcased, and it's mayhem and people being thrown and fights, and then the fight sequences or the wrestling sequences are just brilliant. It was thrilling. It was thrilling, and I'm excited now, because genuinely that's how I felt. And like Mythos was just, it was another experience. I really cannot put into words. I say proud because I'm a wrestling fan, and ordinarily I'm talking about wrestling in film, and how that can enhance film, and how film can tell the stories of wrestling, etc. And I advocate for that, but I advocate for this as well, because it's very much the same thing, and it's something that should have happened so long ago, but now it's happened, and it's happened in a brilliant way. I mean, that's why, if for those of you who are aware, and if you go on Dust the Guild which is Ed's Instagram page, you'll see the reception is received on the Fringe and other kind of avenues, platforms, that and how well received it is, because 5 stars don't get thrown out willy-nilly, and Mythos Ragnarok has a lot of those, and deservedly so. But as I said, I mean, the whole I mentioned Ed, and he was brilliant, and to play Loki on 24 hours notice was exceptional, and he was born to play that character. He just fit it naturally, and he was wonderful, because one of the great things about Mythos is it does have a lot of audience engagement, enough for us as audiences to feel involved and have a part, but not too much when it's, it doesn't derail from the story. And Ed exemplified that in the second act when he was making his grand entrance as Loki, and a crowd member was late to their seat, and they rushed past Ed to get to their seat as Ed was making his entrance as Loki. And instead of just ignoring that, which ordinarily a theatre show would do, Ed rushes to that crowd member and kind of like almost tells her off for ruining his entrance, but in character. And it was a small thing, but it worked for his character as Loki, and it was just brought something to the show, which is special, and it's something wrestling ordinarily does, but theatre does not. And again, it was great. Everybody else, the character who played the performer who played Odin was fantastic. Again, he had to learn it all in 24 hours. And he actually said to me before the show, because I was there earlier when I had met Ed and a few others, with a great chat, he jokingly said to me that, don't be too harsh on it, because it's because of the scenario that they had to deal with. And there was no need to be harsh, because he was exceptional, and the whole show was exceptional. Everybody was great, and they're all, like I said, they're professional wrestlers, and they know how to do that, because otherwise you can't do the show, because, like I said, wrestling's a heavy part of it, and if you can't wrestle and do it safely, do it well, then the show won't work. But as far as their acting chops go, they were all fantastic as well, and the show wouldn't have worked if they didn't bring that level of performance. And yeah, kudos to all of them. This encapsulates, I think, better than anything I could say now, my experience watching Mythos Ragnarok, and why I think you should all watch it if you get an opportunity, and hopefully it just becomes bigger and spreads across the world, and everybody can see it. So for me, it's a theatre experience which you'll likely not experience anywhere else. The sheer volume of choreography and physicality, combined with intelligent storytelling that expertly pays homage and modernizes mythology, makes it a truly unique and enthralling piece of theatre you can only truly appreciate by experiencing it live. For anyone who doubted it, pro wrestling and theatre not only go together, but pro wrestling only makes theatre better. So that was Mythos Ragnarok. That was my experience, my takeaway from it. As you can tell, the excitement, the passion, I loved it. I hope to see it again, and I advise everybody else to see it. Theatre lover, lover of art, storytelling, pro wrestling, whatever, Norse mythology, watch it. It's fantastic. Thank you, Ed Gamester, for bringing it to us. And this was the Wrestling Film Podcast, episode 11. Hope you enjoyed. Like, follow, subscribe to the channel, and share with all your friends. Peace out.